Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now here, two teenagers have been arrested after an 18-year-old man was stabbed to death in East London last night. A 53-year-old man also died at a bookmaker's in London following reports of an assault. It brings the total number of murders in the capital to over 50 so far this year. The government says it's looking at new laws to deal with offensive and dangerous weapons. Our Community Affairs correspondent Adina Campbell reports.
The latest victim of violent crime in London. 18-year-old Israel Ogunshola died last night after being stabbed in Hackney. This is where his body was found. Another white tent with a police cordon, another stark reminder of this week's violence in the capital. And just a couple of miles away, a man in his 50s also died last night after being assaulted.
Yo, wake up, man. This stuff needs to end. Seriously. Like, I'm coming from someone who's actually felt that kind of pain.
23-year-old Yolanda has posted this video on Facebook. She personally knew some of this week's victims and has also lost family and friends through violence over the last 10 years.
Seeing that there's so much deaths this year alone, it just got me annoyed as well. I kind of just had to rant out as well, because it doesn't just affect our generation, you know, it's affecting everyone involved.
He's all right, he's good. Yep. Meanwhile, mother of two, Deanna, who lived in London for more than 2 decades, has recently moved away from the capital.
Sometimes I feel a bit scared to be out on road, certain times of the day. There has been something going on social media where it's a point system now. So, you know, you don't have to be affiliated with that person who would want to shoot you, stab you, rob you. It's just a point system for them, so it could be anybody.
They put the cameras in at Love Lane.
And MP for Tottenham, David Lammy, says he's also had enough. He's been meeting concerned constituents in his community, where 17-year-old Tanisha Melbourne was killed in a drive-by shooting on Monday.
It's just heartbreaking. People are frightened now, frightened for their children to walk the streets. I've not seen the Home Secretary. I've not seen the Mayor. It's unacceptable. Why is life in my constituency worth less than lives in other parts of the country? If 4 young people had died in a leafy shire, they would be all over it.
But action is being promised by those in charge.
We've announced today the Violent Crime Task Force, 120 officers. We're working across London trying to grapple with the issue of gun crime and knife crime. I plead with anybody who has any information at all to please ring.
More than 50 people have been killed in London this year, and some people fear things could get worse before they get better. Well, this is where Israel Ogunshola's body was found last night, and as you can see, the police cordon is still in place and there has been forensic activity happening here all day. Meanwhile, just a few miles away from here this afternoon, a man in his 20s was also stabbed. His injuries aren't thought to be life-threatening, but it's another example of the rising violence here in London.
Adina, thank you.
Teenager Israel Ogunshola was stabbed last night near here in East London. He had asked for help from police officers who battled along with paramedics and a doctor from an air ambulance to save his life. He is the 6th person to die a violent death in the capital in the last 5 days. So what is going wrong and what can be done about it? Later in the programme, I'll be speaking to a parent, politicians and youth workers. But first, Simeon Brown reports from the murder scene in Hackney.
I heard a lot of shouting coming from under the tunnel there. We could see the police on top of a young person trying to resuscitate them. Half an hour later, I came back down the stairs and I just saw a red blanket covering the body. So then I knew he was gone.
The young man under the sheet was a teenager Kalisha saw riding past her block every day. 18-year-old Israel Ogunshola was stabbed to death in East London in an attack that took place a mile from where a 50-year-old man died after an altercation outside a bookmaker's yesterday afternoon. Israel was fatally stabbed later at 8 p.m, raising the murder toll in the capital to over 50. What's been most alarming are the ages of the victims. Israel's murder is the 6th in the last 4 days, and the majority, like him, have been under 21. We understand that the teenager went to City Academy, and he was described as academically bright, with aspirations of going to university, and we were told that he was studying computing. But he died underneath a bridge that separates million-pound houses from a council estate. The adjacent road formed into what was once known as Murder Mile. But like the rest of London, serious violent crime until recently had fallen here, and the area had undergone an upturn in popularity.
We live in a bubble, right, where we just have our own kind of world, and it becomes like, oh, right, this is what's really going on in Hackney, not just, nice swanky pubs and, brunch bars and stuff like that. There is a real kind of undercurrent of crime and violence that seems to be rearing its head, all the time at the moment.
Living on the other side of the road, Kalisha is raising her children during an epidemic that is mainly targeting young men.
My eldest son is soon to be 13 this year. He has to go through that same tunnel every single morning to get to his school. And now he's just a bit frightened to go back after the Easter holidays because, he's scared.
The question is, what will make areas like this feel safer? The obvious answer might be more police.
It just seems to be like cars zooming past, dealing with calls with regards to actually being there on the streets. I can't remember the last time I saw officers walking down the street in any kind of passive capacity, so that would probably make me feel a bit safer. Whether or not that would actually work, I don't know.
The absence of police on the streets leaves the streets open to those that want to commit crime and be violent. There's no deterrent, there's nobody interfering with their activities, and we are seeing the result of that, not just in knife crime, but the moped crime and the acid attacks and all the rest of the things that are going on. The government have failed to listen to the police. We warned them that cuts have consequences years ago and that these things would happen, and they accused us of crying wolf. We weren't crying wolf.
But it is not just an absence of police that worries communities, but an absence of leadership.
It's traumatising entire communities, and we need to take action. If this many young people had died since the new year from a disease, it would be regarded as a medical emergency. This is a social emergency.
From the start of the year, the Metropolitan Police have opened 55 murder investigations. The murder rate in recent weeks has even surpassed New York's. London is a city now gripped in fear for its young people.
I just hope my children can have a safe environment to grow up in, somewhere they could just go outside without worrying that, someone's going to come and stab them or shoot them. I just want them to feel safe, to be able to go to school and come home and just, not worry that anything's going to happen, not having to look over their shoulder. Yeah.
Now, I apologise for the loss of sound to Jackie. When Sadiq Khan was candidate for London Mayor in 2016, he made a promise to get tough on violent crime, particularly knife crime. I spoke to the Mayor earlier, indeed Jackie spoke to the Mayor earlier, and started by asking him if he'd failed to deliver his promise.
I think one murder is one too many. The police are working incredibly hard, but the context is really important, and the context is this. Over the last 7-8 years, the police in London have lost 40% of their budget. They work incredibly hard, but that's on top of losing community support officers, losing police officers, losing police staff, police buildings being sold off, front counters being sold off.
In 2016, you made that promise. Do you acknowledge any failure?
Of course I'm frustrated, but the reality is I've got to be honest with Londoners on a number of things. One, crime's been going up around the country since 2014. Two, a significant amount of our funding comes from central government. But three, we've lost a lot of that in the last 7-8 years, 40% in the last 7-8 years.
How many officers do you need, do you think, to really make an impact on this?
The strategic target that I had when I first became mayor was 32,000. We're now, roughly speaking, 30,000. So if the government was to say no cuts over the next 3 years of £300 million that they're planning to do, but also reimburse some of the cuts they've made in the past, we get to a number that would lead to a significant change.
How much longer can this go on before you have to consider whether the Met Commissioner is the right person for the job?
I've got full confidence in the Met Police Commissioner. She's doing a great job, but she's doing the job like me with one arm tied behind her back. Look, one of the reasons that crime went down in 2008 onwards was the government then got a grip with it. The government then invested in policing across London and across the country. 6 weeks ago, said to the Prime Minister, meet with me and the Commissioner to try and find the national solution to these national problems. She said no. I'm asking again today, meet with me and the Commissioner to see if we can solve this together.
But the problem seems to be that you want to give responsibility to everybody else. You want to blame the government, blame policing numbers. What do you say to the mothers and fathers of those young people who have died, and to the many more mothers and fathers who are terrified when their boys go out at night in certain parts of London that they simply won't come home?
The families are incredibly sorry. I mean, particularly one loss is one too many. Many bereaved families attended funerals. It's deeply upsetting. I've got 2 teenage daughters. It's not just boys, it's girls as well, as we saw over the course of the last week. There's no other city in the world I'd rather raise my family, but I understand the concerns parents have. I understand the concerns big brothers, big sisters have, uncles and aunties have. The police by themselves aren't going to solve this. Enforcement by itself won't be enough. It means mums and dads, big brothers, big sisters. It means civic leaders. It means schools. It means church leaders, mosque leaders.
Would it be more honest for yourself, for the Met to accept that at the moment we don't know why there's this spike, and more to the point, you don't know what to do about it to stop it?
No, that's not the case. There are complex reasons why crime goes up. Complex reasons include how social media has changed in the recent past. I can now taunt you as another gang member using a YouTube clip, which nobody else knows is me taunting you, but you will know it's me taunting you because I've gone to the venue of where one of your gang members was stabbed. We need to make sure social media companies have a role to play. We've also got to make sure...
Would you like more pressure put on social media?
Absolutely, absolutely. Other things we can do is in relation to education. We've got to make sure young people know if you carry a knife, you're not going to be more safe, you're going to be less safe. You don't get more respect, it's actually a way of risking your life as well. We've got to make sure that the police work closely with communities. Policing by consent is really important. That's why there will not be a return to industrial scale stop and search. Nobody's saying it should be indiscriminate. It's going to be targeted, intelligence-led. The game changer, the body-worn video. You as a young person should have confidence the police are using stop and search properly, but it gives the police confidence as well to grapple with these issues. We've got to make sure we look at the issue of gangs. Not all of these deaths were gang-related. Some were. A significant number were. We've got to make sure we target these gangs as well. Is there displacement from gun crime to knife crime? Look at retailers. People can now buy knives from the internet. So the checks we had before in relation to age, buying from a retailer is now gone away. But all this takes investment, takes resources. We're doing what we can. We've invested record amounts from council tax precepts in the last 2 years. Both years I've raised council tax precepts to the maximum I was allowed to do so. This year, for the first time ever, we've used business rates, not just to help with enforcement, but to help with prevention and education as well.
Well, I'm joined now by young people, youth workers and politicians to discuss what has been a truly terrible period. Elijah Mocha, you're a young man. What is it like to live with this constant, seemingly constant violence around? What does it do to young people?
It's just a constant concern in the back of their head. It's just like they're just fearful for their lives. It's like every time they step out, it's like I could be next, or is my friend going to be next? And that it's just playing over and over again in their heads.
And what does that do to you in terms of how you live your life, in terms of how young people live their life, if you're living with fear the whole time?
It can increase paranoia, it can increase, lack of hope. So they're thinking I'm not going to make it nowhere, or if I try and do this and stay on the right path, it's not going to lead to nowhere, or it can get cut short abruptly at some point. So they just give up, have less hope, less value in themselves. It's just disheartening.
Now, you're still young at 24, but even in your young life, do you think things are getting worse?
Definitely, 100%. I think people are lacking empathy for young people, so they're lacking empathy for themselves, and then they just take it out on each other.
Tom Isaac, you work for the Oasis Project in A&E, where you see firsthand young people who've been stabbed come in. What is going through their mind at that point, and what can you do to help them?
Well, I think A&E, even though it's really bad, obviously, that they come in because of stabbings or violence, it gives you a key time to intervene. So, for example, a lot of our young people, they come in, they think, say they're being stabbed, what's going to happen to me when I return? The person who stabbed me lives on my estate. Or they're thinking, I never thought things would get this bad, and they want help. And if you're a youth worker, you can relate to them on a level that probably, the doctors or the police or social care can't. So you can offer this key moment for support. And then what we do after A&E is support them for a series of months, half a year. We keep in contact with them, work with them, their families, their friends.
You always think of young people who may or may not be involved in gangs, because people who are stabbed aren't always involved in gang, but a level of bravado. Does that bravado go when they're in hospital and they're on their own and you're facing them?
It can do. Obviously, if someone's being stabbed, there's serious trauma. Like, a lot of these young people have trauma, first and foremost, in their lives. They feel unsafe. That's why sometimes they have to be relocated. But then how do you support them? How do you address that trauma afterwards? That's what we need to do. And how do we give them real hope for change?
Tony Harriet, you work with young people for the St Giles Trust. I mean, what are you seeing at the moment?
I think what I'm seeing is the effect of the cuts in the education system. So a lot of the young people, they're getting expelled from school and going straight into a pupil referral unit. It's like a hotbed at the moment. So your child could be like doing well at school, have an incident, and then they're put in with the wolves, basically. And there's no sort of support around that. So that's creating that kind of, that violence is kind of coming from that kind of angle, because there's nothing into the education system that's supporting young people suffering from trauma, suffering from the loss of their friends, suffering from the fear that they have all the time. Also, it's about what's going on with the county lines as well, which is really, really, really impacting in London.
And explain that to us.
So county lines is when young people, they come out of London and they sell drugs in the neighbouring counties, so like small, sleepy towns. The police don't really know how to handle it in the sleepy towns, but what's happening is a lot of young people, we're talking like 13, 14, 15-year-olds, that are being trafficked themselves and going up there. And no young person I know can set up a line up there. It's other people behind it, and we need to start tackling those people that are encouraging the young people who are improved, who are expelled from school, like you said, Elijah, that don't have any hope. It's money, it's quick money, and that money and that violence is spreading on our streets.
But also, can I just say, I think it's lack of alternatives.
Yeah, definitely.
Well. I feel like the government's, cutting back or excluding people, sending them to Peru's, but then the Peru's not dealing with nothing.
Yeah.
The Peru's just kind of putting a time capsule on whatever it is they're going through, and then when they leave there, there's going to be a teenager or 16, 17, angry at the world, and then get into crime.
The earlier you can intervene, the better as well. So a lot of these, like just yesterday, I'm talking to a 22-year-old who someone's tried to kill, and if you talk about his story, he's got the same story as the 13-year-olds we work with. Well, on my estate, people said you can make some quick money. They started off by saying, run this weed, you get £20. Then I started to owe them money, and then it builds. So we need to not just be at crisis point, we need to also do intervention early on.
And quickly, Rosemary Wyness, you run an umbrella organisation of 350 youth organisations.
I was just going to say, it's, we have 350 community youth organisations in our network, and what we hear them saying and the young people they're working with is exactly what we've heard from Elijah about, the young people being fearful, and also from Tony about cuts. Over the last 5-6 years, actually in a city that has got a massively growing youth population, we've lost about 39 million every year in support for youth services.
Sean Bailey, you're a Conservative member of the London Assembly, and with gratitude you come on. You're the only Conservative very often who will come on and talk about this, it seems. Do you recognise what these people are saying about cuts to youth services, about young people who feel they have no hope, no alternative?
So before I got involved in politics, I was a youth worker. I was a member of London Youth. I was involved. There's definitely been a reduction in what goes on in youth work, but remember, there's another side of the argument, which is two things. One is about the whole support we give to young people. My big thing is we need to do more about young people's mental health, because one of the other big killers of young people is suicide as well, and that shows you the state of our young people. Listening to Elijah speak, he's spot on. It's about hope. It's about feeling safe. A lot of young people carry knives because they don't feel safe. We need to make the police ask the mayor to ask the police to do different things. Remember, the police in London, we're the best funded police force in the country, £3 billion. The mayor needs to focus the police on organised crime and also the things that generate low-level crime as well. We talk about antisocial behaviour, it becomes something else in the future.
David Lammy, you're MP for Tottenham. You speak out on behalf of your constituents. 4 of them have lost their lives in violent deaths since Christmas. Are people listening to you?
I think they better start to listen, because we're not actually going to get over this problem anytime soon unless we get a political consensus, unless I think we get the right resources targeted in the right areas, and that's not just in policing, it's also in communities. And unless we empower communities to support and help themselves. I've been an MP now for 18 years. I've never seen it this bad. I'm concerned that the profile is younger and younger and younger, and there is unfortunately a callousness because of those young people recruited into county lines at 12, 13. By the time they get to 17, 18, 19, the things they've seen, if they have a gun, what we're seeing is them using it in the most callous and unbelievably horrible ways. That's what worries me.
And we've got to offer hope, and we've got to offer positive opportunities. You know, we don't have enough services for young people, and we need proper employment opportunities.
The key thing, we definitely need employment things. I think employment is one of the... There is no silver bullet. This is very complicated, but employment is one of the long-term things. But the things we need to look at as well, we need to support parents. We need to give parents some knowledge and some tactics to deal with their teenagers in this very...
Successive governments, yours included, have spoken out. We must do something about this, and we have this plan and that plan, but things appear to be getting worse.
Can I just say, like, in terms of, like, empowering parents, like, the amount of children that go missing at the moment are children going to county lines, but parents are actually scared to report their children missing because they feel social services are going to come in, they're going to start tearing them down. The parents feel so disempowered by all the services that are not helping them, and they feel disempowered by their young people.
Do you feel failed? Do you think young people feel failed by successive governments, or...?
100%.
100%.
Like I was saying to you
they're
earlier,
disinterested.
Young people don't feel like the rest of society kind of, you know, gives, you know, cares about them, sorry.
What do you two of both political persuasions say about that?
I have to say, 4 people dying in my constituency, and it only just really making the national news when we had a young boy shot in the local cinema. You've got to ask why urban lives, seem to matter so little. People are cynical because they've heard a lot of this before, and it's just not happened. It's not been delivering.
I think what it is, we need to get... This is beyond politics now. I'm stood here with David Lammy. We are from different sides of things, but we are committed to work together. We need to answer this. We need to answer this problem because we are talking about the future of all Londoners. Because if London becomes a place where people are afraid to live, it will only get worse. We've got to help our young people out.
Elijah, very quickly, do you feel optimistic at all?
Yes or no? I feel like yes, because obviously you have to have hope, and I have to be someone that believes in it because I'm helping these young people and working with them. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of people in the backgrounds that have more resources and more power that can do things that aren't doing things, or aren't talking to the people that are at the front lines, at the youth clubs, in the centres, or like Rosemary, talking to them and actually getting first-hand views on what they need to do.
I'd love to keep talking to you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry to end it there. But later in the programme, I will be speaking to a father whose son was killed in a violent attack last year. Now back to John in the studio.
Thanks, Jackie. We'll have more from here later in the programme.
Welcome back to East London as we approach the end of a terrible week. 6 people have been killed in the last 5 days in the capital, victims of stabbings and gun attacks. And we're now getting reports of 2 people having been rushed to hospital this evening after yet another stabbing less than a mile from here in Mile End. Well, joining me now is Paul Barnes, whose son Kwamari was killed in West London last year. Paul, your son was killed in broad daylight just after he left school.
Yeah.
Did you ever fear something like that, or did you think this is something that happens to someone else?
Never. I never thought it would happen to someone like myself. You know, you see it on the news, you hear about it, and you always think like, oh, sorry for those families, but it'll never be myself. And when it does hit home, it's devastating.
I mean, your son was 15.
Yeah.
The boy who killed him was just that. He was a boy, wasn't he? He was 15 years old. Did you ever get any sense of why he did it? Why he picked up that knife and killed your son?
No. We've not had any explanation why he's done it. He has apologised, says it was a mistake. He didn't mean to kill Kwamari, but he stabbed Kwamari 3 times. You know, and I always say you can't stab someone 3 times and say it's a mistake.
When you go through a week like this with more stabbings, killings, what do you think as someone who's been through this already?
Do you know, it's upsetting. It's upsetting, and I'm also getting angry at the whole situation as well. Like, this year alone, we're in the 4th month and we've had over 50 killings. You know, it's ridiculous. Yeah, last year was 80-something killings. We've not learned nothing, and it seems to be getting worse.
And you have another son. I mean, what is it like for him as a young man?
Well, at first he was real devastated about the whole situation, yeah, and I had to speak to him about it because he was handling it a bit hard. But you know, now he sees the reason and he's got a good head on his shoulders. So,
where do you think the answer lies?
The answer lies with funding. Also, the community needs to come out and do something as well. Yeah, don't just leave it to the police officers to tackle the crime that's happening out there today.
What can the community, what can individuals do?
Well, we need to be there for our young. Yeah, we need to be there for our young. We need to show them support. Yeah, we need to let them know. But we've got them. You know, they're not out there by themselves. You know, we show them love. We need to give them love.
I mean, every parent I've ever spoke to says they wanted their child to be the last one. Yeah. There have been so many since Kamari died.
So many. And I said the same thing. I'd love my child to be the last one. And, you know, what I'm hearing over the last few days, I still pray, but this is it. This is the last. You know, I pray, but it doesn't happen again.
Well, Paul Barnes, thank you very much for joining us
Thank you.
this evening. Thank you very much. Well, that is it from us this evening.
Now, the stories are heartbreaking and the figures are shocking. That there is now a really serious problem with gun and knife crime in London is in no doubt after 2 more murders last night and yet more stabbings tonight. The argument is over the reasons behind it. London's mayor blamed cuts to police budgets and youth projects. One London MP says it's drugs. The head of the Metropolitan Police cites social media. Well, whatever the reason or the combination of reasons, the fact is more than 50 people have been killed in London within the first 100 days of the year.
Another night in the capital and another young victim of violent crime who will not see the morning. A grim scene more shocking because it's become so familiar. 18-year-old Israel Ogunzola was stabbed to death, the 55th murder on London streets this year. Neighbours talked of a bright, popular young man about to start at university.
We're still trying to come to terms with it. I still can't believe it. I still think it's not real. Because who would do that? Who would do that to someone? Who would take a young person's life who's just beginning, just starting?
On the pavement in Hackney, where a promising life ended, friends and family of the teenage victim lay flowers and messages. For them, it's a personal tragedy. But for all members of the community, it represents an ever-present threat.
You have kids and you don't feel safe for them coming home from school, going out with their friends because you don't know if they're going to come home or not. Sometimes it could happen twice a week, once a week. So it's something that people get used to. That's why you see people walking past and not really paying attention to what's going on, because they know that it's either a shooting or a stabbing. Because it's that's how everybody sees it. It's London, it's Hackney.
Suggestions that the police have lost control are denied by the mayor, though he says spending cuts have had an impact.
It's got to be a link between massive cuts in policing budgets, massive cuts in youth provisions and the increase in crime. This crime increase is not unique to London.
Latest figures show there were just over 31,500 police officers working in London last September. That's almost 1,000 fewer than the year before. There are also concerns about stop and search numbers. Nearly 140,000 searches took place in the capital in the year to March 2017. Over 18,000 fewer than 2016. Today, the Metropolitan Police responded to an increase in gun and knife crime, announcing the formation of a specialist unit to tackle the most violent offenders.
Targeting those individuals where we have intelligence who we know are violent, doing everything we can to arrest them and take them away from communities. And that includes using every tactic we can that's lawful.
This new force will have 120 officers. Their job to make the capital streets a safer place. And already, within hours of their formation being announced, there are more indications tonight of the task they face. There have been 4 more stabbings in East London tonight. Here, an abandoned weapon. Here, evidence of the paramedics' battle to save a life. The latest violence leaving 4 people in hospital, the youngest just 13 years old. Paul Davis, News at 10.
So there's clearly no doubt something needs to be done to stop the violence. The question, of course, is what? London is already looking to the example set by Glasgow. It too was once a city gripped by knife crime, but has all but eliminated it by attempting to tackle why it is happening as health, education or social work issues, an all-round community-based approach.
Scotland was once described as the most violent country in the developed world. Glasgow had one of the highest murder rates in Western Europe. Not today. This street food business employs young offenders. It's run by the Violence Reduction Unit. It's a programme that's credited with dramatically reducing knife crime by treating it as a health issue.
What we had to do was understand the problem, understand beyond the symptom of carrying a weapon, of why young people and why people were doing this. And what we did is we started to tackle those causes. We started to tackle behaviours and attitudes.
13, 14-year-olds are pretty routine, as young as 9.
A 9-year-old?
9-year-old.
With stab wounds?
With stab wounds, gunshot wounds.
It's a much grimmer picture in London. Martin Griffiths too often has children in his trauma unit. The surgeon says an increasing number are arriving with multiple injuries. He's witnessing a level of violence never seen before.
What troubles me now is not so much the numbers, but the severity of injuries, the youth of the victims, and most terrifyingly, the acceptance in the voices of the parents when I tell them their boy's been stabbed or shot. They expect it to happen. They've been waiting for it to happen.
They knew it could happen sometime.
They knew it was going to happen at some point in that child's life, and that's what horrifies me.
Jimmy Mizzen's parents didn't expect it. 10 years ago, the 16-year-old was brutally killed while in a bakery with his brother. Today, his father, Barry, told me it's time we, as a society, took some responsibility.
It has to be community-led. Listen, strong communities are safe communities. We've lost something there. We are very much waiting for somebody else to do these things for us. I mean, I understand the passion behind marches, but you're telling someone else to do something, but what are you prepared to do? You know, look at it different, reach out to each other differently.
Gangs posting videos on YouTube and other social media are being blamed for glamorising, even normalising violence. The government wants internet companies to do more to remove them, but preventing children from choosing such a lifestyle is perhaps the first step.
I was just going to join the back of the queue.
XLP is a charity that works with inner-city teenagers, steering them away from a violent future.
There's not much you look forward to, like coming out of school, coming out of secondary, coming out of college. We, as a community, we need to find different ways. We need to encourage young people to do different things apart from staying out in the streets, robbing people, carrying knives and blah, blah, blah.
The reasons behind the violence are as complex as the solutions. But whatever the solutions are, it's families of the victims who are suffering today. For them, any change that comes will come too late. Emily Morgan, News at 10.
Stabbing now appears to be commonplace in London. Tonight in Tower Hamlets, in the east of the capital, two 15-year-olds were knifed and are in hospital. Last night, 18-year-old Israel Ogasola was attacked in Hackney, also in East London. He died at the scene. There have been 35 fatal stabbings in the capital this year, of more than 50 murders. And today, Metropolitan Police Commissioner Cressida Dick set up a task force of 100 officers to tackle violent crime. Cressida Dick claims that social media sites rev people up and make street violence more likely. Others have been more sceptical. So what is the case? Our technology editor David Grossman has been to Hackney to explore what role social media actually plays.
Police tape and flowers, the grimly familiar ritual of another death on our streets.
So Israel Ogunsola becomes the 35th person to die in London this year as a result of knife crime. The authorities are scrambling for an effective policy response. It is not clear, however, that what has worked in other British cities to reduce knife crime is going to work in London.
We don't yet know anything about the circumstances around this young man's death. But speaking before this latest tragedy, the Met Commissioner, Cressida Dick, said that in London, social media was turning petty squabbles into bloody battles, sometimes in a matter of minutes. One of Hackney's MPs is sceptical of this explanation.
Social media is a symptom, it's not a cause. The underlying issues are social, they're educational, even economic, because some of these young men that are out on the street in gangs, it's partly because there don't seem to be any opportunities for them in the wider society. So there's a lot of things we need to crack down on social media, but they are a symptom of this rising tide of violence. They are not the cause.
Guys, somebody's passing, man.
On Hackney Marshes, some young men gather in the evening sun to play football. Bobby Kasanga started Hackney Wick FC as something to do when he got out of prison 3 years ago. He says social media is central to the current wave of violence. He told me how gangs post videos that escalate quickly.
One of them will go over to the other area and say, look, we're in your area, there's nothing you can do about it. And they will see it as an embarrassment. Oh, we let these guys in our area, we should go to theirs. And then when someone slips up and gets caught, because they say, oh, that's that guy that was in that video, he gets caught, he may get beaten up, and that video goes viral and everything spreads like wildfire. And then there'll be the comments like, oh, this was meant to be the so-called gangster, and look, it's embarrassing that he's got him beaten up, that he's not that tough. So that embarrassment that they feel, they want to retaliate, and then things are just spiraling out of control, and you've seen it everywhere across London.
It's about profile. People, some of it is about profile.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, some of it. I wouldn't attribute all of it to profile, but it's definitely something that's adding to the fuel. Whereas before, where people have punch-ups, no one would know about it. It would just be a low-key thing. I wouldn't know who you are from. I mean, I could be from, well, I'm from Peckham, and I could have come to Hackney, and no one would have known who I was.
Over the last few days, many have pointed to Glasgow as a city that London should emulate. Glasgow has managed to drastically reduce violent crime by treating it as a public health issue. But according to one academic who studied the approach, the parallels are limited.
I guess one of the key differences between London and Glasgow is the racial dimension. So the knife crime and violence problem in Scotland has historically been one of poor young men, and there hasn't been a racial dimension to that. And of course we've seen within many of the problems in London, not just at the moment, but even looking back to the London riots, that racial tensions within the community were part of the problem for that. So in addition to a kind of multi-agency response, there needs to be ways of trying to identify, bringing the police and the communities together and ensuring that the response to violence isn't seen as a punitive response to racial problems.
That is a warning to say, like, London's actually a part.
Bobby Kasanga agrees that in Hackney, mistrust of the police is common and widespread among the young men and boys he works with. If social media and technology are the problem, I asked him, what's the solution?
If you know there's more police around, you'll think twice about carrying a knife. You think, oh, I'm not going to walk over there with a knife because there's a police there. So it's about more visibility. And I'll also say, keep them busy. I mean, as you can see behind me now, there's kids playing football during the holidays, and we normally train our kids maybe 2 or 3 times a week, but for those other 4 days in a week, we don't know what they're up to. We don't know what influences they're getting. But if there was the money from the government to say, okay, there's football Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sundays, these kids will turn up because there's something for them to do. And the more you're keeping them doing positive activities, the less they're going out there carrying knives.
That report by David Grossman. Well, I'm joined now from Glasgow by Dr. Christina Goodall, the founder of Medics Against Violence. Good evening. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. Christina Goodall, you became involved in a particular project in Glasgow. Why did you become involved?
Well, essentially, we became involved because we were seeing lots and lots of young people who were injured as a result of violence, and we really felt that we had to do something about it. So it was getting past the point where it was okay just to patch them up and send them back out onto the streets.
But you were maxillofacialist, so exactly, tell me what was happening. What were you seeing?
We were seeing people who'd been slashed, who'd been stabbed, who'd been hit and punched with implements, hit with implements, all sorts of different things. So it was injuries to the head and neck that we were seeing.
And you were seeing these same injuries coming back, the same people?
Yes, I have done. I have seen the same people come back only a few weeks later with exactly the same injuries.
So then this new sort of programme was designed particularly to go into schools and tell a particular story with a lesson plan and a film. So how was that devised, and what were the kind of triggers? We've heard people say there that actually, Diane Abbott's saying it's about socioeconomic problems. But what do you think was the situation in Glasgow, where knife crime for many years was rife?
Well, I think, as you've heard already, here it was a problem of young men from socially deprived areas of Glasgow largely. And with our school programme, we very much tried to target those areas, those schools that were in those areas, to try and reach as many of those young people as we could. And what we found was impactful with them was not to show them lots of gory pictures, but to tell them the stories of people who had been affected by violence. And they like to hear those stories, they can identify with them. And actually, I think they take a lot away from that.
But also, it's about a multi-agency report. It's about a public health approach. Now, explain how a public health approach is going to be different, for example, from a task force of 100 police officers in London.
Well, the thing about the public health approach is it involves more than just policing. And I think that's something that's really important. So policing, of course, is important, and it's important to get the right police response. But the public health approach looks at what the problem is, so it has intelligence around that. It then looks at risk and protective factors. It then looks at interventions that might be effective based on those risk and protective factors. And then if those are successful, when you try them out, you scale them up and try and reach as many people as possible.
Now, Cressida Dick said last week that she thought that social media revs up, vulnerable people, essentially. Do you get any sense of that in Glasgow? Is that an element of what was going on?
I don't think it helps, but it certainly doesn't cause violence. It's not the root cause of violence. But I can't deny that it probably doesn't help the situation once things are starting to escalate.
But also, what is also said in some cities is that this is a cyclical event in a way, that actually gangs will use knives, then they'll move on to something else. And actually you can see it changing, not quite generationally, but just within a few years, there'll be a different modus operandi.
Well, I don't think we're seeing that happening in Glasgow. I think what we've seen is a consistent drop in violence across the city, and that has continued. And actually, the reassuring thing that we're seeing is that the drop has been greatest amongst young people. So the age range of your average victim of knife crime now is older than it was maybe 10 years ago.
So in fact, you're removing knives from 13, 14, 15-year-olds. That is not in their game plan at all now.
No, and actually we know from speaking to young people in schools that is not something that they support. They still may be supportive of reactive violence, so reacting to something, if somebody maybe insults your mother or something, they would react to that. But they're not supportive of carrying knives, and they're not supportive of gang-related violence. And actually that's not the way they want to live their lives.
Christine Goodall, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Watching the press preview with me now, Ian Dunt and Katie Balls. We're going to continue our look at the papers with the Metro. David Lammy, MP, on the front of the Metro with an interview describing the violence in London.
Yeah, he's been doing the rounds today. Actually, he's quite good on this topic. He manages to combine quite left-wing, quite right-wing sort of analyses, really, in a way that you don't see a lot of. For the right, he sort of talks about family breakdown. He talks about availability of drugs. On the left, he's kind of aware of the more sort of social and economic and structural factors of this. Typically speaking, when you see sort of spats like this, rises in crime, it'll be interpreted by right and left according to preconceived ideas of what they think will fix it and where they think the causes came from. He's able to talk quite simply about this stuff while bringing those two things together, and usually is quite compelling on these sort of issues. He's been proving that for the last couple of days. He did actually have one rather unfortunate moment earlier today, though, I have to say, while on competitor TV channel, the BBC, while talking on a street and sort of saying that I have been here for ages and haven't seen any policemen at all, and at exactly that point a policeman walked into view behind him. But apart from that rather unfortunate event, he's been doing very well.
He also talks on a human level about, I have a teenager who comes home from school, I'm scared for him, and my constituents are worried and frightened, they're angry, and they have every right to be. And tonight, attention is on it, and we're probably reporting more stories than we would be, but another 5 stabbings this evening.
Yes, awful. I mean, the figure I had coming in tonight was, there's been 50 murders in the capital this year, and that's gone up while I've been sitting in this chair. It's horrendous. And in terms of stabbings and kind of things on the street. So no wonder people are worried and scared, particularly in areas where there is a record of this happening in the past few weeks. I think what's interesting is obviously he's calling for unity from all parties, but we're also, if we're going to be honest, very close to a local election in London. And I think that's the time that parties are the least likely to work together and the most likely to try and weaponise these issues to score points against one another. So you really hope, for everyone's sake, we can kind of try and come to some cross-party consensus on what different issues need to be looked at. But I do think it might be the case that it's more likely to be effective post-May, after they've got that out of the way.
We also heard from the London Mayor Sadiq Khan today.
There's a lot of attempts to use this to attack him in a manner that I'm not sure is entirely fair, really. And of course, he's trying to pass the buck back to Theresa May in a manner which is also not really entirely fair. She, of course, went out of her way to try and stop and search, or at least to limit its usage. Cressida Dick doesn't take that particular approach towards it. Stop and Search doesn't have a very good track record of sort of actually limiting this kind of thing. If you increase it by 10%, I think you get 0.1% increase in sort of in crime. It's not particularly effective mechanism, but it's one of those very easy answers that political opponents trying to score points off each other can sort of weaponise against one another.